doing?
These are amazing.
What's that?
I haven't had one of these in like 5 years. I forgot about them.
You have an extra?
These green apple candy like lollipops with caramel on the outside.
Is it like a holiday thing or?
No, I just
There were
forget
always
about
like
them.
the fair ones, you know, like the
Yeah.
soccer or whatever, and it's like one for $1 to like get the state and stuff. They're usually like that.
Oh, nice. You got any
Yeah.
extra?
What?
You have any extra?
No, I
Class
bought
gives you
I bought this one at some store in the mall
Oh.
yesterday for 55 cents.
Nice, I gotta try them out. All right, everyone else doing good? Nothing new, care to share? All right, we're in the home stretch. We got, just a little bit over 2 weeks left before we're done. So try to get all your assignments in and completed
Yeah.
so that we can work on our final exam the last week and proceed forward, wrap things up. All right, so we're looking at some more systematic desensitization. So we talked the last class about how we can use exposure therapy, right? Exposure therapy to address issues with anxiety, phobias, and other things related to stress and fears, right? So now we're at other techniques. So we have one called imaginal techniques. We talked before how if someone had particular phobias or anxieties regarding some sort of stimulus, how we would actually take them physically out at some point to get them corrected in their assessment of the stimulus, right? But here we're gonna use the mind. We're gonna use mindfulness techniques, right? We're gonna change the impression of the weights and values assigned to people, places, things, events, and circumstances, right? So let's think about what anxiety truly is and what phobias are and what are the source of phobias. What do you believe the source of phobias are? Internally, what do you think is happening when someone has a phobia? Yes?
Would it be, my first thought is traumatic memories. So something like I was bit by a dog before, now I don't like dogs because when I see them, I immediately get rushed back to the upsetting event of the dog. But then I also think about like, I don't know, someone really young or just someone who has like a random thing like, I don't like clowns or something like that, or I'm scared of clowns. And it's like, why would, maybe you don't have necessarily a bad event like that, but it's tied to some kind of memory. Maybe when I was a really young kid, I saw a scary movie that had the clown in it or something like that. So I think it always is something happens that triggers a negative memory that you try to avoid, and it resurfaces emotions that are upsetting.
Excellent. So what Will is saying is that there is a correlation, a relationship association to something that has occurred in the past, and that past event leads us to rationalize that that thing may occur once again, even under different circumstances. Right?
Or even just possibly just triggers upsetting emotions. Maybe it's just like this random thing just makes me uncomfortable. It's like, I don't know why. So I don't know how specific it has to be. But.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying something is appears to be unpleasant, right? For us as therapists, now we try to have to understand why is that thing unpleasant, right? So we just don't want to leave it there. Think of the associations. Well, we have to address the things that occurred within memories past. And so we say, well, it's somewhat illogical thinking. It's a rationalization and justification for something dealing with the unknown. So if you think of the source of fear itself, fear has to deal with the unknown possibilities of what could potentially happen on something, an event, a circumstance of that. Well, how do we go to change that? Well, we have to give our clients some sense of logic and some sense of rationality and reason based on the context of anything new that happens in life, right? Not everything is exactly the same. Even if it deals with the same things, the context is usually different. So what do? Well, we want them to be mindful. What does mindful mean? We want them to be more consciously aware, because the fear itself derives from the subconscious. If we're talking long-term memory, we say it's an automatic response, right? Subconscious. And we want to bring more awareness to say, hey, let's stop, think about this before I respond to it and give into the fear, give into the phobia, and also give into the stress and anxiety. And so we say, well, what is our impression of this thing? What is our impression? Well, impression means what weights and values do you give to anything that happens in life, right? That's why you have anxiety. We give things weights and values that are inaccurate, totally inaccurate, because they're trying to rationalize a likelihood or possibility of thinking we could know the future and how that future can take place based on things that's happened in the past. Right, so here with this imaginal technique, we're thinking of just using the mind to conquer the fears and the phobia, right? To desensitize. Remember we say we're talking about exposure. Exposure means, hey, if we repeatedly show or experience something over and over and over again, eventually it loses value. It doesn't have as much value. Pro and con. Now think if you live in certain parts of Mexico, and you're an American. So you move over to Mexico, and maybe you live in an area that's filled with drug cartel activity. You would say, when I first showed up, I experienced PTSD, shock, with the level of violence, the type of violence, which the psychologists call hyperviolence, right? Beheadings, mutilations, things that are shown to really trigger an average normal mind by creating fear, right? Tactics used by the cartels and the mafia previously, and the Russian mob, and all sorts of groups to instill fear. Now over time, you may actually say, you know what, just another Tuesday. Right, what's the difference between when you first showed up in Mexico and saw this, and when you lived there for 3 years, right? Same can happen here in Chicago. We are exposed to a high degree of carjackings now and armed robbery like never seen before, and people are still living their lives and going about their daily business, right? And for other outsiders who come to visit Chicago, they come to visit here petrified. Right? They're petrified, they're concerned, they are triggered, and they have anxiety, right? Don't go in this neighborhood, don't go with that neighborhood. And for someone who lives here, we know that, hey, I've been exposed to this for quite some time. I'll use my best judgment when I see something that I need to think about. For the most part, whatever, right? Same sort of concept here. The more we are exposed to anything, the less we give it weight and value. We say anxiety deals with weights and values given by the impression that the mind has on certain phenomena, people, places, things, right? All right, so systematic desensitization is an imaginal exposure technique for decreasing phobic responses using graduated hierarchy of anxiety eliciting stimuli that client visualizes. So in this setting, we have a client in our office. We have them laying down or sitting down, and now we want them to close their eyes so they're not distracted by the outward environment. And we're going to do several techniques. We're going to try to have them imagine the spiders, right? Maybe we could just put sounds, right? Maybe we don't put anything. Maybe we say, you know what, let's not put anything external to our client. Let's make them create in their mind the actual scenario. The sound of a spider crawling, the visualization of the spider, what it looks like.
Do spiders make sound?
Yeah. Yeah, depending on the size. Depending on the size of the spider and the surface material that it's walking
Yeah, I
on.
was gonna say just the surface. Like,
Yeah.
I've never heard a spider like
Yeah, but a lot of the phobias, part of it even is the sound, even if they've never heard a sound, because they've heard it on movies.
I
right?
know when I'm actually in. I used to, like when I was a really young kid, I hated like violence, like something about it, like in movies and stuff, I was just a little scared. I was a kid and I would get scared of like seeing it. And then now I've gotten more and more just exposed to it, so now like violent things don't really bother me, like I've watched really like gory, violent TV shows and stuff. But the thing that still does really get me, is I watched one show one time that like really got me, or like, it was a Netflix movie, and it was about like feudal fighting and stuff. And there was a scene where he like stabs a dude in the chest, and they do it like really graphically, and it was the sound that got me, is.
Yeah, I mean, we think of rationale logical, right? So you say an average small spider, you won't hear anything. But since we've been exposed to, say, movies that have shown large spiders with a sound effect of an 8-legged creature crawling on the surface, that in itself, that sound, because it sounds unnatural, we have 2 legs, dogs
Yeah.
have 4, we're comfortable with 2 and 4, we're not
Yeah.
comfortable with 8, right? So that it within itself does create part of the phobia, right? We like this, the movement of an 8-legged creature and the sound that that would make is very unpredictable in how quick it can get to you, the movements itself, the type of movements. So all that plays is an alien. We're essentially looking at an alien, the way we view these things, right? Such an unknown thing. Unless you like spiders, and unless you work with spiders, unless spiders you don't care. You absolutely don't care about the spiders. Now, like you were saying before, maybe there was a traumatic experience, or maybe it was a movie, right? Maybe it was Arachnophobia, which was a very popular movie when I was a kid growing up. And that dealt with millions of spiders, like infestation of spiders into a village, a town, whatever. Other movies dealing with giant spiders. When I was growing up in the 80s as a kid, like a lot of movies was about giant ants, like the size of semi-trucks, right? A lot of those type of movies. And it left an impression on a lot of people my age, in terms of their fear of even ants, spiders, because those are very popular movies as a child. Those memories stick forever, right? Because your greatest memories as a child. So like you were saying before, long-term memory traumatic. Traumatic could be not even in the household, not even out in the environment, just something you watch. You watch something that triggered you don't like it, right? And so we could say, well, we want to have our client imagine, use their imagination, their creative mind, in order to manifest the visual, the auditory, the sensations of what it's like to encounter a spider, right? And we try to figure out what the true source is. For a lot of people, I say when it comes to things like that, it's the movement. Spiders are so unpredictable because they can jump, right? And you don't know which ones. There's so many species, we have no idea which each one does. We don't know which one could create a severe bump, right? A severe bite, poisonous. It's just very unfamiliar species, and we're a little bit more, I say we're probably visually a little bit more comfortable with things that are more linear than circular when it comes to any sort of species. It appears to be way more of a foreign concept to our mind, which means things like an octopus, things like even manta rays, things that are more oval or circular in visual perspective are more foreign to us. So it creates more of an uneasiness.
But in the imageal technique, you would want to isolate each sensation, right? Because you don't want to overload them.
You know,
Because that's what I was thinking about is, like visually, gore isn't that disturbing to me anymore. But in that movie, it was like a really, like accurate, like crunching, weird sound, and I was like, like that gets me. So I'm thinking like smell, hearing,
Yeah.
sight are all physical sensation are all very different
What part of this?
exposures to go through with someone.
Absolutely. What part of the senses is more triggered than others, right? So you're thinking of, when you saw that, you say, oh wow, Hollywood production really amplified this unique sound
Yeah.
that this
I
person.
mean, yeah, even like the screen was cut out and you just hear like, and it, all you hear is like, poof, poof, as he like goes through the two
Yeah.
pages and stuff.
And
Like,
so if we were to address that, we say, the fact that you did not actually see visually when it pierced that individual and it being moved into the individual creates this unknown in your
Yeah.
mind, this void, and now you just associated that this sound,
yeah, but you hear this foreign.
weird sound. And you kind of
uncomfortable
like,
sound.
does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
Right? Good Hollywood, good Hollywood music editing or whatever, sound editing rather. But is it accurate? We don't know. So we're gonna take it for gospel and roll with it. That'll happen. So we want to say once again, come back to logic, right? Because these are emotions and impression on things. So we want to come back to logic. And say, you know what, I don't know and it's okay not to know. So it's based on the premise that an individual who is deeply relaxed in the presence of an imagined fear stimulus cannot be anxious and tense at the same time. Which means that if we can have our client understand that they're in an environment that they can relax and be comfortable in and still bring out that fear, that stimulation of fear, that they cannot in essence be relaxed and frightened at the same time. One takes hold over the other. So if we give them the environment, we could give them also the perception that they at some point can escape that presence of that fear and mentally go back to a comfortable state by control. Let's say like some sort of self-mastery in a sense. Techniques. So you say, well, you know what? I've seen some people just, if they saw something that really bothered them, they close their eyes for a few seconds, and they literally mentally go somewhere else, peaceful, right? Their safe place, and it makes them feel comfortable, and they come back and open their eyes, and they're not as anxious, right? All right, so we're looking at pairing phobic or anxiety eliciting stimuli with relaxation stimuli until the phobic stimuli no longer elicit anxiety. We repeat this process over and over and over again. Imagine a spider, right? Imagine flying on an airplane that you're afraid of flying on. Imagine that feeling. Put yourself back in that seat, right? 35,000 feet above the air. What is the real trigger? You're like, well, once again, we're dealing with the unknown. The trigger is, for most people, even when it comes to airplanes, is, hey, I have no idea how this works, right? I have no idea how the physics of this works, the engineering, the mechanics. Therefore, I think if one thing goes wrong, it's all over for all of us, right? And then we say, before we've placed this into commercial practice, we have 100 redundancies built in just in case. Even, both engines go away, we could glide another 100 miles to land the plane, right? So we want to have someone bring a little bit of knowledge, but also just imagining pairing that, because that knowledge brings comfort, right? Knowledge brings a pleasant thought. You're like, hey, I kind of know. Me knowing makes me feel comfortable, right? Me not knowing makes me feel uncomfortable. So pairing the two, the feeling of not knowing and the feeling of knowing together to say, you know what, let's bridge them together and create a pleasant feeling. What were you gonna say, Will?
It was more just about planes. I was like, is it the fear of do people who fear planes have the fear of the unknown because they don't understand the engineering and stuff, or is it that they don't have a sense of control over it, that I'm locked in a metal tube that just I could die at any moment?
Yeah, it's different types.
I mean, it could be a third doctor as well, like my girlfriend's terrified of heights. And getting on a plane is scary because of that reason.
Yeah, Sometimes, yes, fear of heights could be a thing, but I've seen people with fear of heights, stationary fear of heights, like going up to the top of the Sears Tower, be completely comfortable with flying a plane. Because it is sort of the visual perception of it. It's like once you're up, you have no idea how high you're up or whatever, right? Maybe takeoff is bad and landing is bad, because you get a visual.
Or it's just the edge, like, I'm in a sealed compartment, so I'm fine, but if I were to open the door and see the ledge right there, and then suddenly it's just.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, there's